Please welcome Irvin Poff and his granddaughter, Tiffany.
Hi. Welcome. I'm very honored to have this many people show up for Irvin Poff's story. I've decided I'm going to sit by Irvin. So after his 25-minute presentation, 25 to 30 minutes, when you start your questions, I'm going to ask my cousin Bobby to go around and hand the microphone to you so I can hear your questions better and he can. But that'll be after his presentation. Welcome.
The sound is coming through okay?
Yep.
Okay. In the first place, I want to make clear I don't consider myself a hero. I grew up and went to service in 42, and I was a little older than most people going into the service because I was 25, and most were going in at 17 or 18 into the pilot program. I maintained I was a little more mature. I took less chances and probably lived longer because of that. You can call it luck, or you can say you make a little bit of your luck. I believe some of you want to know what my time in the service was like. I volunteered in the U.S. Army Air Force and went into the reserve in June of 1942. At that time, pilot training was full, and I had to wait 6 months in order to go into active duty for training. At that time, all training for pilots consisted of 4 9-week training at 4 different locations. I got on a train and was transported to Santa Ana, California. At Santa Ana, California, we went into normal Army 2-story barracks, and we spent 9 weeks there learning Army. It's our basic training, and the other half of the day was spent in essentially college training in aircraft issues that included aeronautics, weather, and all of the things that we were going to be getting into as we went into the further training. After 9 weeks, I was transferred to Blythe, California. We had open cockpit, PT Ryan, low wing aircraft. Some of you are familiar with it. I tossed my cookies several times, and in those cases you have to wash the plane off as well as get ready for you. My instructor was more tolerant than most, and I finished and completed it and was transferred to Pecos, Texas to train us in a BT-13 single engine, more powerful than the PT Ryan. We spent 9 weeks there learning to do all kinds of maneuvers, stalling, recovery from after the plane stalls out. And then we were transferred to Stockton, California. At Stockton, I flew the UC-78, which was an 17, I believe. In the civilian part, it would carry up to 5 passengers and twin engine. Since they had already designated I would be a multi-engine pilot rather than a fighter pilot. We graduated there in October. Then we were transferred to Ardmore, Oklahoma, and I was trained with a crew of 10 people on the B-17, and 45 crews were left at one time from Ardmore, Oklahoma to go to Kearney, Nebraska to pick up new planes to go to England. But for some reason, 4 or 5 crews were pulled out of the middle of that group, and I was one of those, and we were transferred to Hampton, Virginia. There we flew B-17s, training navigators to use a new radar dome that was installed in the bottom turret of the B-17. When we left Hampton, Virginia, we were transferred to southern Italy, eventually getting to Foggia, Italy, which is just opposite Naples. I was transferred there to the 2nd Bomb Group. There were 5 B-17 bomb groups at that time in Italy. At that time also, there were 8 B-24 aircraft flying high altitude missions. That's 8 plus 5, 13 groups of planes which would put up from 24 to 28 planes each group. And sometimes southern Italy got a little crowded when we were all taking off so that we were going the same direction. But we got it fine, and I assigned to the 2nd Bomb Group and the 96th Squadron. The squadron we were assigned to had just had a bad situation the week before. They came back from a mission in which they sent out 28 planes, and less than half of them got back. So they lost 12 or 14 planes with 10 people on each one of them. And so that group had to reorganize. The Army decided we need some new development and better heads for that group. So the colonel that was in charge of the group was replaced, and most of his helpers also. He decided that they were not going to fly any people into combat until they were fully able to demonstrate to him that they could fly close formation. In those days, if you didn't fly close formation, the only enemy aircraft that were up after you went for one that didn't have good formation. In good formation, each one of those 28 planes had 10 50 caliber machine guns. That's why they called it a flying fortress. And they were most vulnerable before that from straight in. The B-17F didn't have a straight turret down on the nose. That cured them of coming straight at us because the navigator could take those twin calibers, and if it's coming straight at you, he could shoot straight back at a fighter coming towards you. So we fooled them a little while. After about 10 days of where we flew formation for practice, I was assigned to one crew, and a crew normally didn't fly 8 hours one day and then fly 8 hours the next day. Hopefully you had enough crews that they could fly every other day. So you had a day of rest between each. Now, flying at 5,000 feet, 25,000, we flew on, dropped all of our bombs between 19,000 feet and 25,000 feet. Then you were flying with non-pressurization and no oxygen except an oxygen mask that you took oxygen with your breathing. There were still short of co-pilots, so the first month I flew half or 25 of my 50 missions. Now, some of the 50 missions counted double. If we were going to a place like Ploesti, where it was 8 hours to flying formation, going and coming home, and below around the refinery complex, we would be bombing. They had 240 88 millimeter anti-aircraft guns that shot up what we called flak, because they shot, and based on the altitude, they were, when they got to our altitude or what they thought was our altitude, they busted up in little pieces, so that if you got shot below, you might get a hole the size of your fist, or you might get a hole the size of your little finger. I brought one home one time with 240 holes in that aircraft, and it was still flying perfectly, and nobody got hit. Now that's a little bit luck, but it's also you flying good formation, and we didn't see any enemy aircraft because they looked for one of the groups that wasn't flying good. Now flak, all we saw usually was a big puff of black smoke, and sometimes the black smoke almost hindered your being able to see around because they were pretty thick when 240 are shining at the same time. I completed the half of my missions, and normally at that time they figured a pilot and crew needed what they called rest and recreation. When I finished mine, I was being promoted from a second lieutenant to first lieutenant and be given a crew as a first pilot. I told my commander I finished the first half in 30 days. If it suits you, I would be happy to take my R&R when I finish my 50 missions. And it fit with their needs. And so I continued to fly them as first pilot during the other half. We flew as far north as Czechoslovakia, but most of our flights were to Albania, Yugoslavia, Austria, and the Ploesti refineries. We were working on their railroads and their refineries to keep them short of gasoline, which they were getting most of the gasoline from Ploesti. Sometimes you say, well, weren't you scared? Yes, I was scared to death. The first one, when I'm sitting up there as a co-pilot, looking at all those black puffs, wondering when one's going to hit you, you're scared. My 50 missions included at least 5, I think 6 over Ploesti that counted double, but they counted other. The worst damage that I received, and I would say this, Boeing then had a stellar reputation with all the pilots that flew B-17s. That plane was designed for high altitude in the time that nobody was flying high altitude bombing, and it would take you there and take you back most of the time if you did it right. My worst situation was we went in, and you always fly to the Doksa Nation, and then you have what they called an initial point, where at that point you turn and head directly toward the target. We were 4 minutes from the target when I lost my inboard engine on the right side. I had 2, 3 planes above me. The flight above me was flying here. He had one here, one there. I'm flying right here. And I have one here, and right here, and right there underneath me. I can't get out without getting 4 other people out of the formation too. Those planes were first in developing a turboprop, where a turbo would give the extra power that you needed for taking off with planes. Those planes took off with, 46 pounds of pressure on the cylinders. 26 you get if you're taking off without a turbo at ground level. But you're taking off with 36 pounds of pressure. The emergency power on those, which was only supposed to take in under emergency, was 55 inches of mercury. And that turbo would give you 55 inches, even though you're up there in very thin air that would get you less than 13 if you didn't have a turbo. I closed that one engine off so that it doesn't windmill, and gave my other 3 55 inches, and stayed in formation into the target, because I knew, as normal, you would peel off at the end of dropping the bombs and get out of the black fiber. And so At 4 minutes, we've dropped the bombs, and I could come back a little bit, I thought. But the leader saw in front of us a lot of flak, and he decided to stay on his high rate. So I had to stay on 50 inches about 7 minutes, where 5 is supposed to be the maximum. Those Pratt and Whitneys stayed with me, and those 3 were checked out when I got home and okay. And I was able to come home in formation rather than be dropped out singly, and then Axis would be looking for me because they looked for stragglers and the poor formation at that time. I was able with 3 to come back and land with the formation with no real problems, except wondering if I had bothered the other 3. So that was my worst situation from that standpoint. But I said I got a lot of hold. Another time, I also got 3 people with minor injuries from the flak hitting them, as well as making a hole in the aircraft. So I was lucky. I followed procedure to help my luck along. Okay, one other notable thing and trait that I had, we had a mission on which our group, our 28 planes, went further than we could go and come home. And we were in northern Czechoslovakia, and we were planned to land in a Russian airport over the border. We landed our 28 planes and parked them wing to wing tip around this airport, and we had to stay there for 7 days before the weather cleared out to where they could get everything planned to where we would go somewhere where we'd come home with the whole Air Force, not just one squadron by themselves. The airplane, maybe some of the specifications, it carried 1,200 gallons of 100-octane gasoline. That's small compared to now, but that was a lot to carry to 5 miles up. It carried 6,000 pounds of bombs. Those bombs could be 100-pound incendiaries, or they could be as heavy as 2,000 pounds each. We bombed one headquarters in northern Italy, where the headquarters we knew was underground. So we carried 2,000 pounders, and these fuses were set so that they wouldn't go off until they penetrated the ground, instead of going off at the top. We thought we knocked out that headquarters. I don't know. It's a lot of luck. That trip that we took to Czechoslovakia and landed in Russia, we were on the ground in Russia. We heard about the landing from England while we were on the ground. Our cover of P-51s for that time was grounded because they were afraid to get up to fly in defense of that airport because identification, friend or foe, was not known back and forth between Russian and American at that time, and they kept us on the ground. I finished the missions, flew my 50, came home, was given a job of instructing again at Pecos, Texas. We stayed at Pecos until it closed. I finished World War II at Love Field in Dallas, which was a ferry command, not combat. I discharged from Wichita Falls in '45 as the war had closed down in the Atlantic, and I didn't get transferred to the Pacific. I stayed in the reserve, and in 1951 was called back for 21 to 24 months for training for work as a pilot during the Korean conflict. I spent most of the time that I was in for the 21 months as an instructor pilot in the T-6. After the instruction in the T-6, we eventually got the T-28, which was made as a pilot for instruction. Much easier because you had a throat mic and you just push a button instead of having to hold a microphone to you. The T-6 in training is awfully hard to teach in because you had to have one hand on the stick, you had to have one hand on the throttle, and you had to have one hand holding this mic in front of you if you're telling the thing. And it's hard to back forth from the throttle to the hand microphone. I stayed in the reserve when I got out of that because I had 12 good years in reserve then. So I retired as a lieutenant colonel. That's all I have for straight out.
You didn't tell that story.
But my engine,
When it caught on fire and you were going to jump out of the airplane, you didn't tell that story. Your B-17 caught on fire.
the fire, it didn't catch on fire. It just showed a complete lack of oil pressure. And those engines, you feathered them so that it took 25 pounds of oil pressure to feather the engine. Now, feathering it means you're turning it so it's straight like this and it don't turn. If you leave and lose an engine and don't feather it before you lose the oil pressure, then it floats and runs just like you do with a little plane that you're flying, and it's turning in the wind. Now, that's a big drag on your plane, almost like having a piece of plywood up there the size of the propeller. So we feathered it and brought it in. As we found out, it was a mistake, It wasn't actually anything wrong with the motor. It was wrong in the pressure regulator. And the motor was all right. But if they're feathered and cold, you can't start one of them up there at 0 degrees after it's been cold, and the oil gets almost solid.
Are you ready for questions?
I'm ready for questions.
Okay. Any questions? The name of the plane you flew, and do you know what happened to your aircraft?
We were unusual. In Italy, we didn't have enough planes for everybody to have a plane and name it. You were flying different planes at different times. I never did know of flying the same plane consecutively because they had planes that they kept and get sometimes to get so that they had at least the 28 planes that were flyable. Now, in order to have every person to have the plane the same time, that means you have to repair it overnight, or you have to have twice as many planes so that that one can stay down and you send up one that has the thing. So this way we could fly every other day or every day flying in a different plane. In England, most of the planes you did fly the same plane. We didn't do that in the 15th Air Force. Now, let me say this too. Everything was different during then. Everybody, or most everybody, appreciated and thought the people that we elected were doing what they were supposed to do. We appreciated the president, and we thought they were doing the best they could. We had no big group of journalists who were looking for bad rather than looking for good. We were looking for good. In those days, everybody appreciated that flag. We didn't have flag burnings. Hey, I think they'd probably stomp them into the ground if they stomped the flag into the ground. Everybody appreciated the country that we were living in. It's different now. We're all looking for what is wrong. And there's a lot wrong. But there's a lot right too. So if you want to live long, look for what's good. Look for what you can do and get done.
Any other questions? What? Yeah, just stand up. Oh, thanks.
Hello, thank you. Had two questions actually. One, had he done or had you done much flying before you got into the service, or was this your first experience getting into an aircraft?
Did you fly
Being in
before
the
the
early
service?
40s, it was probably not much flying going on back then for commercial. And so what was his experience before that? And the other question I had was, has anyone reached out to him to like production studios to do any kind of
Okay.
documentaries or?
I did the only flight I ever flew, including, you see, you didn't have passenger planes then. The first passenger plane, as far as I know, was the old Ford Tri-Motor. It had an engine on each wing and one in the nose. It would carry up to 7 passengers. One summer during my college time, we were at Keokuk, Iowa, and one of those was there that we had an opportunity to go up and fly as a passenger with. That was the only flying I ever did before I went into the Air Force. After I got out of the Air Force, I got a commercial pilot's license. You get a pilot's license, then you can get a commercial with greater experience. I had that active commercial license, but I never did use it because at that time there were a lot of other pilots going out and there wasn't the need for that many pilots. I had a job that was waiting for me that I was guaranteed back with the U.S. Department of Agriculture. So I never flew as a pilot other than during the war and Korean.
Has anyone contacted you to do a documentary on your military experience, a movie on you?
Lately, a few have done that. Mostly, this is the biggest group I've ever met with, and the most, as far as being on a video or something. I have met with a company that makes pictures of World War II aircraft and people. I was contacted by them, and they have one of the B-12, B-24, B-17G, and I was asked to sign those, and my name and picture is on that. Other than that, as I say, I'm not a hero. I'm just a member of the organization that saved us during World War II and continued to help in the Korean War.
Does he recall, or do you recall, sir? First of all, you are a hero in my eyes. Second of all, does he recollect the number of hours he's logged, military and non-military?
Military flight hours or just military hours? Plane hours.
I'm not certain. Somewhere in the 700 hours, as I recall, and that's just a guess. I looked last night trying to find my old flight log, but I didn't find it easily, so I didn't get it.
And he said, you are a hero. You are a hero, he said.
What?
He said, you are a hero.
Well, depending upon your definition. Generally, hero is somebody that does something that is above and beyond the call of duty. I did what duty made and did the best I could.
Didn't you have a story of your parachute catching on fire and the crew had to put it out? Didn't you have?
Oh, yes. One of the times that I was ready to jump out of an airplane. Now, as far as I was concerned, I don't think I'd ever like to hit the parachute, but I did that time. This was a case of where our oxygen bottles for each individual pilot was about that big around and about that long. It was made and out of thin metal and was low pressure, where we just sucked in the thing from those. It was enough oxygen to take one of those 8 or 10 hour flights. One piece of flak, the size of the finger, went through the oxygen bottle in and out the other side. We had on the inside of the B-17 a little piece of, I think it was probably fiberglass, but it was no thicker than a 1/4 inch. Well, the piece and that oxygen and that was kind of flying around the cockpit behind the pilots, and it was making a fire anywhere a piece of that fell. The fiberglass was not flammable, but if it fell on something, it would start a fire. We got a fire started behind the cockpit, and I fastened my seat belt to get out, because a fire in an airplane, that's enough to hit the silk. Actually, it was good that I didn't. I was flying with a pilot that had had further experience. He said, "Set back down." And the top turret operator did get the fire out. Our parachutes, for us at that time, we wore a harness, and there was 2 clips right here. That front parachute clipped onto those 2 clips and worked because it was stored behind our seat. Because sitting on a parachute, you don't have, it's not very comfortable for 8 hours. So we had it fastened. Always, that was a normal place for pilots' parachutes to be. There are 10 of those little rubber things that open the parachute that are wrapped around it. Four of those 10 were broken when we got back home because a little piece fell on that rubber and burned it in 2. So if I'd have taken the parachute, maybe it would have opened, maybe it wouldn't. We don't know. Lucky, yes. Smart, yes. We sat down and waited before jumping out. Who knows?
I want to gauge the energy of everybody. I have about 20 questions I could ask him and keep him going. I want to know how your energy is doing, Irvin.
Huh?
Is your energy doing fine? Can you continue to answer questions?
Suits me, I don't care. It's a damn day. For any of you didn't know, I will be 105 as of the 25th of this month, next week.
And we are going to celebrate your birthday.
I am proud to say I still have a driver's license in the state of California. The state of California is not any way partial or don't look bad on age. I have my new driver's license, which extends till I am 110. I doubt very seriously if I will use it that full time, but as long as I can see good and can hear the siren, I can drive safely, and I can take any of you on a ride, and you will agree I'm safe as a driver. I'm safer than I was when I drove a lot faster. But I maintain that if you're driving on a California freeway, there are two safe ways to drive. One is get in the right-hand lane and drive as close as you can to 65 miles an hour. Otherwise, you're going to get hit from behind. The other is get on the inside lane and follow whatever the guy in front of you is driving. Keep a distance from him and realize you can't fly formation with him because he hits brakes first. Now, flying formation in a B-17 is like driving the inside lane and one car length behind that guy. You have to be and know and react a little fast. Otherwise, we don't have any brakes up there.
We're gonna celebrate your birthday. Did you see your cake?
Yeah,
Okay. We're gonna have lunch.
I'm ready.
So,
Sorry for taking so
can
long.
you move over here
Okay.
so we can sing happy birthday to you? I'll put the chair over.
Okay, that's all right. Just give me time.